morning, everyone. Thank you so much for connecting in with us from all of the different schools where you're at. You are in the session with a specific emphasis on anxiety and school refusal. We have two guests with us today that will be doing their presentation, Vanessa Neufeld and Dan Cloak. Vanessa comes to us with a background in special education, who holds a master's degree in special education with a concentration in autism and developmental disabilities from UBC. Where she currently serves, she's at Vancouver Christian School, and there she serves as a K-8 education support services coordinator and behavior consultant. Dan, on the other hand, he holds a master's in marriage and family therapy. He serves as a counselor at Vancouver Christian School as well, and particularly has an interest in the role or the impact of parents and systems on children development. So without further ado, let's welcome our guests, and thank you for being here.
Good morning, and welcome to our presentation on anxiety and school refusal. Thank you, Brett, for already introducing us. So you'll hear me talk a little bit about anxiety first, and then we'll have our breakout in the middle for some discussion, and then you're going to hear Dan talk about some case studies of anxiety at our school. So I'm going to skip these slides. So you're probably all here because you have a student in mind that is feeling anxious about something at school. I hope that in this presentation that you're going to learn the difference between normal and maladaptive anxiety. We're going to talk a little about what cognitive behavior therapy is, and talk a little bit about exposure and its role in overcoming anxiety. I also hope that you're going to leave this presentation with some strategies to help your students deal with anxiety and be aware of some of the resources that are out there. So let's start from the beginning. What are you scared of? So depending on your developmental stage, there's different things that we're commonly anxious about. I know that when I volunteer in the church nursery, there's a lot of screaming babies, but that no one is worried about those babies having anxiety disorder, because at that age, these are common things. It's expected that when you drop off your 2-year-old at the nursery or at the preschool, that they might have a big reaction. These things are expected. And so for me, my kids are 8 and 10. My son still sleeps with multiple nightlights in his room, and no one's worried that this is an anxiety disorder, because for his age, this is something that's common and expected. My daughter is 10 years old, and the things that she worries about is doing well in school, and sometimes arguments with her friends will make her feel worried. These are also things that are common for her age. So in terms of what's normal and what's not, some fear is normal and necessary. We all know about the fight, flight, and freeze responses, and that fear helps our students react appropriately in normal or difficult situations. So one example is that actually last week, one of our students spotted there was a large coyote in our school backyard in their field area. That was a big problem. So they came in and they told the teacher, and we were able to alert people, especially our small kiddie students, that there's a coyote on premise and we need to be careful. And so anxiety is only a problem when it's developmentally inappropriate. So like I said, talking about the different ages and stages of common anxieties, or appropriate fears that lead to excessive distress or dysfunction. So if we treat a squirrel in the backfield as extreme as a coyote in the backfield, then that's a problem. So an anxiety disorder is one of the most common mental health conditions. I'm sure you can all think of somebody at your school that might be dealing with anxiety. It affects about 20% of our children and adolescents. And the symptoms of anxiety look different in every person. A person might come to school quite withdrawn, avoid eye contact, and kind of hide behind the walls and things like that. Or a student with anxiety might also be exhibiting anxiety in very challenging behaviors. All we know that is when there's no intervention in place, it's increased with the risk of depression, substance abuse, missed opportunities in relationship and career, and a general lower quality of life. What it's really important to understand is that there are 3 parts to anxiety. Anxiety is made up of our thoughts, what we say to ourselves, physical feelings and emotions, how our body responds to all this, and behaviors, what we do and our actions. All these 3 parts are connected, and they change behavior requires addressing thoughts and feelings. Later you'll hear us talk about CBT, and particularly what it looks like in our students, that starts by changing the thoughts and that helps us change the behaviors. So we all know about the flight, fight, and freeze response. So the temporal lobe is the amygdala. So this triggers the flight, fight, or freeze response. And it's actually really important. It's important for our survival to make good snap decisions in high stress situations. But the students that we're thinking of are in this heightened sense of arousal a lot of their life, for most of the time. And it's actually really terrifying for them to experience all these symptoms for the majority of their day. The DSM-5 is how an anxiety disorder is usually diagnosed. So there's 11 different types of anxiety disorders, and they all commonly share some symptoms: changes in mood, changes in cognitive issues, behavioral changes, and physical changes. Children with anxiety disorders experience these symptoms more often and more intensely than their peers. Because like we said before, some anxiety at different ages is normal and expected, and it helps us thrive. But these children, their anxiety prevents the child from engaging in actual daily life. So we don't have time to go over every single anxiety disorder, but I'm going to highlight a few that we see co-occurring with school refusal a lot at our school. The first one is generalized anxiety disorder. This is excessive, chronic worry that interferes with a person's ability to function normally. People with generalized anxiety, they worry about the same things that we all worry about. They just worry about them more, and more often than other people. We all worry, did I lock my car? Did I study enough hard for that test? How are my savings plans going? What's going to happen this day? But these things kind of take over their whole life. The size of the reaction doesn't really match the size of the problem. You can see in the little comic here, Charlie Brown's little friend is saying, "You look kind of depressed, Charlie Brown." And he said, "I worry a lot about school. And I worry a lot about worrying about so much. And my anxieties have anxieties." So this is a good caption of what it might be like living with generalized anxiety disorder. You worry a lot, and then you worry that you worry too much. And so you can see that this can be really debilitating for somebody having all these worrisome thoughts for the majority of their life. Separation anxiety disorder is another one that we see co-occurring with school refusal quite a bit. It's the intense fear and anxiety about being parted from the people that they're emotionally attached to. So the diagnosis is given when the distress associated with the separation is unusual for the person's developmental and prolonged and severe. So like I said, no one is diagnosing anybody in the church nursery for having anxiety disorder, but we see that kind of intense reaction in a school-age child or older middle school child, then we start to worry, is there something else going on here? With separation anxiety disorder, these students usually need to stay close proximity to their caregivers, and that interferes with their daily functioning. And when they're at school, they might spend an enormous amount of time thinking about what's going to happen to that person they're attached to. So you might be at school, but you're constantly thinking about mom. What's mom doing? Is mom going to be okay? What if something happens to mom while I'm here? So you can see that also having some of these worrisome thoughts is going to be really hard to focus on doing your math test or getting along with friends at school. So social anxiety disorder is one of the most common mental disorders. It's an irrational fear of being watched, judged, embarrassing and humiliating themselves. And some of that is normal. Even me standing right here, I have a little bit of fear right now and anxiety, but I'm able to take those irrational thoughts and say, it's going to be okay, take a deep breath, and keep going. Students with social anxiety disorder have so much extreme anxiety that it interferes with their daily functioning. They're coming to school with thoughts like, oh, my friends are going to laugh at me. I'm not good at this. This leads them to feeling dread and anxiety. They can feel their physical symptoms change. Their hands are shaking, their heart is pounding, they can't breathe. And when they get to school, they end up having some behaviors like hiding behind walls or trying to get underneath the desk, avoiding eye contact. And this just reinforces the cycle that this is something that they need to be feared. And it kind of makes them feel like, I am being judged, I am being watched, I am embarrassing myself. And the cycle continues. The last one that we're going to highlight is agoraphobia and panic attacks. Agoraphobia is the persistent and extreme fear of spaces. They're usually outside the home. So this might be taking the bus to take you to school. It might be open spaces. It might be enclosed spaces. We had a student at our school that had extreme fear about being in our lower gym because it had no windows. And that person's fear is always out of proportion to any danger that could actually occur in that space. And it may or may not be accompanied by panic attack, which is brief episodes of intense anxiety. So this student at her school, when she was in the lower gym, she would have panic attacks because she would be so scared about not being able to get out of the lower gym fast enough and that her legs would start to fail her. So this brings us to school refusal, which is an absenteeism as a result of behaviors that are often symptoms of an underlying anxiety or psychiatric disorder. So the kids that we're talking about today in terms of school refusal is the kids who are anxious because of a mental health condition. They're not able to attend school. So this is different than truancy for kids who don't want to go to school because they'd rather skip school and go to the movies or hang out with the mall with their friends. The kids that we're talking about today are the kids that are having so much anxiety and they want to be at school, but they physically can't get themselves there, or experiencing such symptoms that when they're there that they can't stay there. So school refusal itself is not a DSM-5 diagnosis, but it's considered a symptom that's usually associated with an anxiety disorder or another mental health condition. And obviously it's problematic based on its severity, frequency, and distress, and its impact on daily functioning. So some of the students that you'll hear later, they didn't attend school at all because every day, every situation was so anxiety provoking that they couldn't come to school at all. We have other students that only have anxiety for certain situations, so maybe avoiding band class because you might have to play that solo by yourself that day, or doing a class presentation. That might be the day that you all of a sudden can't come to school because you know you have to stand in front of everybody and give your presentation. So depending on the student, we see all across the spectrum in terms of how severe the school anxiety is in terms of their refusal to come. So the cycle of school refusal. So it's important to understand again the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So the thoughts that students that might have are things like, I hate recess, and I'm just not good at school, and kids are gonna laugh at me, and I don't have any friends, and what if I fail at tests, and I really just can't do math, and everything's gonna think I'm dumb. So this cycle of thoughts then leads to feelings like you're dizzy, anxiety, stomach aches, nausea. We have kids that are so afraid, and it's visible on them that they're shaking when they're in a certain situation, whether going into the lower gym or going into the class. And some of them, it leads them to avoidance, complaining, crying. We've had situations where kids refuse to get out of the car, and these are school-age kids that were not young in the primary age, older kids that refuse to get out of their parents' car because they're feeling all these uncomfortable symptoms. And so this leads to, again, going back to the thoughts, I really couldn't do that, it was too hard. And then again, feeling those symptoms, and then the cycle continues. So what do we do? So what we're talking about today is the interventions for school refusal. We're going to talk about cognitive behavior therapy, targeted parent training, active school consultation, and collaboration with professionals. So I'm going to go through each of these things. The first one is CBT. CBT is the only non-pharmacological treatment that has received strong empirical support for the treatment of anxiety disorders. This just means it's the only thing that's not a drug that has actually been shown to help with with anxiety. It involves teaching a person new strategies to manage behavior when faced with anxiety-provoking situations. It involves training your brain to replace these irrational thoughts with more helpful thoughts, and recognizing the physical symptoms of anxiety, and ultimately changing behavior so that individuals were able to face their anxieties. So in terms of CBT, what does it look like? It includes psychoeducation, which I'll tell a little bit more about, and then eventually making an anxiety hierarchy with the student and slowly exposing them to things that they're scared of and making sure they can generalize in all situations. So starting with psychoeducation, understanding how anxiety develops can actually ease anxiety. So a big part of it is teaching students that body-mind behavior connection. They need to be able to start recognizing, oh wait, I'm having these thoughts again. And these thoughts are making me feel this way. And when I feel this way, I act this way. Teaching the student to recognize that cycle helps them start understanding and be able to put a pause when they're starting to have those anxious thoughts. And also find that when you're working with younger students, having books on anxiety can really help them normalize and provide some vocabulary for what they're feeling. And especially for students also who have developmental disabilities or autism, a lot of the time they don't have the vocabulary for what they're feeling and experiencing. So psychoeducation, a big part of it is giving them vocabulary so they understand the symptoms and everything that's going on with them. Another big part is realistic thinking. You can see in the little comic here, the guy says, what on earth is that? And he's got this crazy storm cloud, and he says, oh, it's just my mind. The kids that we work with are like this. They have a storm cloud of all these different thoughts they're having. They're thinking that they're not good enough. They're thinking they're worried about what their friends are thinking of them. They're worried maybe they forgot to pack a spoon for their lunch. All these things are just taking over their minds so they can't focus at school. So a big component of anxiety is made up of these irrational thoughts. And changing these thoughts actually affects changing the behaviors and feelings. So our role at school is to try our best to gently as possible challenge some of these unrealistic thoughts. The example I gave earlier, there was a student who was having a full-out panic attack because they forgot a spoon for their lunch. And then so we can gently challenge some of these things like, hey, you gonna be okay? What are some things that we could do to solve this problem? Where are some other places that you could eat your lunch? Is that going to be okay? And being able to gently as possible challenge some of these unrealistic thoughts, maybe provide them with some more helpful thoughts and direct them in the right direction. So this is the part where I talk about repairing the staircase. I don't know if any of you guys have read the book, The Whole Brain Child, Dr. Siegel and Dr. Bryson. It is a fabulous book. And he talks about the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain. The downstairs brain are the things that are responsible for making those snap decisions for safety. It's reactive and sensory processing. Our upstairs brain is the more logical side. It's the part that's in charge of thinking, reasoning, problem solving, and planning. So when things are working well, there's a staircase, so that when we see the coyote, we think, we need to make an action right now, and we jump into action. Whereas the upstairs brain is able to help us slow down and think about what to do. So anxiety results when the lower brain overreacts and breaks that staircase to the upper brain that helps us think, reason, and plan. We don't want our downstairs brain to be in control all the time, because then we won't be able to think things through. One example of this is that we started leaving our kids at home for short periods of time now that they're a little bit older. So we always leave a phone at home, and we leave them at home for probably less than an hour. So this last week, I went to the grocery store, I left the phone with my daughter, and then I always text her when I'm at the store and when I'm leaving. So I had my cart full of groceries, I text her and said, I'm leaving now, I'll be home in 5 minutes. And then there was no response. And usually she likes to send me a little emoji to say that she got my message. And this time she didn't send me a message and said, hey, what are you doing? No response. And then I tried calling her twice and nobody picked up. So right away then, my downstairs brain wants to take over. It says, oh no, something's happened, it's alert. We got a signal like an Amber Alert or something. Someone probably like kidnapped her from the house. I need to abandon my cart of groceries. I need to run home right now. Probably not even take the car, I should just run. The good thing the connection wasn't broken. I was able to access my upstairs brain and think about this. Okay, what are the chances that she actually is hurt in the house, that she's actually in trouble? Okay, she's 10, she's not answering the phone, what should I do? And I started thinking, she's probably watching videos. So instead of calling her on the phone, maybe I should just call her Messenger Kids, because I bet you she's on her laptop. And so again, instead of calling on the phone, I called her Messenger Kids, and right away she pops up and says, hi mommy! And I'm wondering, why didn't you pick up the phone? And she says, oh, I'm watching YouTube videos and I have my headphones on. So if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't been able to access that staircase to the logical problem-solving side, I would have abandoned a perfectly good cart of groceries and probably sped through multiple traffic lights trying to make it home. So that's an example of how we need to repair the staircase. The students that we work with are operating in that downstairs brain too much of the time. So we need to get them to understand that some of these things aren't big issues, and we can just access the thoughtful planning side so they can make some better decisions. Another important part is personifying anxiety. Students need to know that they're experiencing anxiety, but they're not defined by anxiety. By personifying anxiety, it puts the child back in control. You can negotiate with anxiety, you can not listen to what anxiety is telling you, and it makes something that's so abstract, this anxiety thing, more concrete for them. So there's curriculum like Taming the Worry Dragons, where it's you versus the worry dragon. You're the warrior and you're facing the anxiety. There's another book called Don't Feed the Worry Bug, and it's actually a little app too, where you can feed him anxieties, and he grows bigger and bigger and bigger to visually show a child that this is what happens when you let anxiety take over. And I don't know if any of you have seen that movie that's come out on Disney Plus called Luca, but there's a scene there where he's nervous about riding a bike, and his friend is saying, oh, those voices, that's Bruno. And they call this anxiety Bruno. And they say, you need to say, Silence Bruno. And so he does that. He says it over and over again until he's brave enough to ride his bike down the hill. And these are some examples that we can personify anxiety so that the child knows that they're not defined by it. And this is something that they can conquer, and it's not a part of them. So this brings us to exposure. Exposure consists of having a child face his or her fear. It's based on the premise that avoiding anxiety-provoking situations actually reinforces that it's something to be scared of. So the whole goal of exposure is to elicit those dysfunctional, irrational beliefs and teach the child to face the anxiety without avoidance so that they can experience some success. The students that we're dealing with have had a lot of unsuccess. They've had a lot of failure trying to face their anxiety. And it helps and it reinforces their thoughts that this is something that I actually need to be scared of. So this brings us to the anxiety hierarchy. It's an exposure ladder, a list of situations that are anxiety-provoking from least to most anxiety provoking. And the reason why we use gradual exposure is because we want our students to experience success. You can see in the cartoon here, it says, Professor Gallagher and his controversial technique of simultaneously confronting the fear of heights, snakes, and the dark all at once. So we don't want to do this for our students. We don't want to flood them into everything that they're most scared of because we want them to experience success. An exposure hierarchy, an exposure system, is able to help them slowly, step by step, be able to face the thing that they're most scared of in a positive and controlled way. So to break the anxiety cycle, we give the student an opportunity to face the things that they're scared of so that those anxious thoughts, those anxious feelings, the physical symptoms and the avoidance doesn't continue over and over and over again. Exposure provides for them a pathway to break the cycle through really small steps. So you're probably all thinking, how do we get the student to go through with this? So something that we have found out is that the person carrying out the exposure sessions needs to have a good, strong rapport with that student. You can see later when Dan talks about the students here, the people carrying out the exposure tasks always have a good, re-established relationship with that student. We also make sure that the gradual exposure task is never too hard. And that's what the hierarchy is for. And sometimes we make a hierarchy of 10 steps, and then we realize it actually needs to be 30 steps because we thought step 1 to 2 was going to be easy, and then we actually need to break it down even more. We also want to make the expectation really clear, using visuals and clear language. Especially when you're working with students that have developmental disabilities, they need to know exactly what they're doing that day. So using a first-then schedule or something like that where they know that today all you need to do is walk through the hallway and you can sit in the library. That's all you need to do. You don't need to go to class today. That makes the child understand what they need to do to experience some success. And for some students, we need to make the reward really clear. One of the students that we worked with, she loved bubble tea, and her mom would say, when you do this thing, when we come home and I pick you up, we're going to go for bubble tea. And that was something small, but encouraged her to be able to go through with the task. We also need to let the student dictate the pace. We might have a schedule in our head that in 2 weeks, this person is going to be coming back into school. Sometimes that's not the way it works. You take 2 steps forward, and then sometimes 3 steps back. And then you take 2 steps forward, and you take 1 step back. We really just need to celebrate with the child anytime they're able to move anywhere closer to the goal of being back in school, and then be able to take a step back when they need it. And sometimes modeling and role play is helpful. For a child to pretend that this room is your classroom, and I'm going to pretend that you're giving a presentation. Let's role play that. Let's see how that feels, so that as they're feeling those experiences of anxiety, we can practice in a very safe place what it might feel like. And also embedding choice. Instead of telling a child what they have to do, we can try to build a little bit of choice back in the situation. So we can ask the student, all right, so today's goal is to sit in the library. Do you want to walk this way through the hallway or get to the library this way? Do you want to say, the goal today is to talk to one peer. Which peer do you want to talk to? Do you want to talk to Susie or do you want to talk to Jen? Giving them some choice helps them go back in control and be able to make some choices about something that they probably really don't want to do. So parent training is another very important part. So I am a parent, my kids are 8 and 10, and as a role as parents, our job is to protect children. And so I understand that parents need to be a part of the intervention. A lot of the students that we're working with have parents that are also very, very anxious, and they may be either unconsciously or consciously modeling that anxiety. And so sometimes through anxious talk or avoidance behaviors, kids start to realize, well, maybe that is something I need to be scared of. Growing up, my mom hated driving anywhere she didn't know, especially if it was on a highway. And this isn't something that she told me that I need to be scared of, but I would just observe her as a child being so stressed out if she had to drive somewhere like going to Langley or Trinity or something like that where you had to drive on the highway. And so for me, when I started growing up and I was getting my driver's license, and I started having a lot of anxiety about driving on the highways, especially going to new places. But for me, myself, before I came to VCS, I worked as a behavior consultant. And this meant that I needed to drive and do either home visits or school visits all across the Lower Mainland. So part of my job meant I had to drive from Surrey, and then sometimes Langley, and then cross the bridge and go to Richmond, and then go back to Burnaby. I was driving a lot. And so for me, in my role, I almost was exposed, having my own little exposure therapy sessions to realize that driving on highway wasn't such a terrible thing, and that I could do this. But I had to go through that, and I realized that my fear of driving new places was a lot of bit because it was based on anxious talk that I heard my mom talk about growing up. So we find that parents can benefit from psychoeducation as well. When parents also understand thoughts, feelings, behavior, and that connection, they can also catch it when they're doing the same thing themselves. And that coaching parents to be empathetic, but also model being brave. I think a lot of the time, sometimes these parents inadvertently reinforce anxiety by agreeing with the child that that's something to be scared. And it's important to be able to differentiate the difference about showing empathy. Oh honey, I know this is really hard, and I know that you're feeling really scared, but not agreeing with them that it's something that's worth being scared over. And so lastly, I want to talk about collaboration. So with the school counselor, ESS coordinator, resource teacher, principal, teacher, and specific students, it takes a whole village to overcome anxiety, especially when it's really, really a deep issue. We had psychologists, psychiatrists, behavior consultants. It was a whole work of different people, all doing their part to encourage the student to be able to do what they want to do, which was usually come to school. So we're going to pause here for a little bit. You'll see the discussion questions up here. You feel free to talk about at your schools and your wherever you're watching. Talk about how school refusal is seen at your school. Is it anxiety? Is it a lack of effort? Is it the stressors? How is it seen by parents? What about the students? What are the protocols in place at your school for students with school refusal? And what interventions have your school tried for school refusal cases? So you can take the next 8 minutes or so to have a talk with your people that you're watching it with. We'll also be monitoring the Q&A and maybe address some of those questions at the end of this. And then after that, you'll be able to hear from Dan Cloak, who was our school counselor, and he'll be sharing some cases of school refusal at BCS.
Hi there, welcome back. I'm Dan Cloak. I was introduced at the beginning. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for doing the first presentation. So my job is to kind of just take you through some of these experiences at school and these stories that these students have carried over the last year. To start with, I'll start by answering the first question, which was, how do we come alongside and support parents who struggle with their anxieties that are being passed on to their children? What if parents are reluctant to acknowledge their own fears and anxieties? This is a challenging one, particularly me as a counselor. I spend a lot of time with parents, and I bring them in and I talk them through their anxieties and help them see it. But a big piece is helping parents feel motivated to shift and change, not even talking to their anxieties, not calling them out and saying, this is your fault, you're doing this, it's the only reason your child is anxious is because of you. That is an entirely unhelpful approach. But if we actually bring them in and say, wow, what are you noticing at home? And then if you have an anxious parent, usually those anxieties are just in the room and they begin to see, and you can actually just by labeling them and saying, I'm seeing a lot of anxiety for you, what's going on for you right now? And this is a counseling approach, so as teachers you don't really need to go to this approach, but it is just about acknowledging that there's an experience here and there's a lot going on, and you can refer them on to a counselor or refer them on. It's like, wow, I can see that this is so important to you, that your child is safe, that your child is doing well in school, and I'm seeing a lot of emotion or something coming up for you, and then and redirecting them. A nice thing about our school, actually, we'll move on, is that at VCS we have this very unique opportunity that we have a counseling team. So in such a small school, I think there's 850 students in our school, and we have 4 counselors, and we as a group, there's 2 male counselors, 2 female counselors, and we can collaborate and talk and try set students up and families up with the best support counselor. And we work as a team, and our jobs as counselors are both on the tier 1 role to like support teachers, help them with different students and strategize of how they can implement this into the class to support students with anxieties or social struggles or emotional struggles. And then we also see those students one-on-one when they get into the tier 1, tier 2 phase. The ones that I'll be talking about today will be in the tier 3 phase, both of them. But we support them. We also spend a lot of time doing parent evenings, education series. And so we do this probably 7 to 8 times a year. And we'll just invite the school community of parents to come, and we will talk about anxieties and their experience as parents, and how can they shift their perspective in best supporting their children using different approaches in psychology and educating them in that approach. But really, every parent has the same goal of like making their children viable adults that can thrive to the best of their ability. And how do we help parents kind of adapt their approach and then hopefully alleviate some of their anxieties and realize some of the things that they're carrying. And in a way, we can kind of sideways say like, oh, this is an anxiety. As we're talking about parenting and whatever the issue is or the theme, we ask parents to actually take a time to focus on themselves and be aware of their own internal experience, and then take that on to what they need to do and adapt to be better parents and better human beings, and it's just normalizing that experience that we all have work to do. I have anxieties as well, and how can we as a team adapt? So that's my response, but also kind of introducing like what a privilege it is to work for VCS and have a team around me as a counselor. So here's some stories at Vancouver Christian. That's our brand new campus, 2 years old. And here's some case studies. I like to say case stories, but this is Jessica. She's in middle school, and obviously all the names and information is slightly adapted, so you won't be able to identify the student. But the student had school avoidance due to social anxiety. The student was a victim of a complex kind of social bullying, both online and in person, and her anxiety with regards to school skyrocketed. And this was a complex situation because it was so intertwined with her friend group. And so calling people out or dealing with it as a bullying situation was really tricky initially, because there wasn't actually any overt bullying. It was all subtle relational pieces, stealing friends, and student was strong against us just going in and doing and dealing with as a regular bullying thing. As it went on, we did eventually get to address it as a bullying, and that was really helpful for the student. But initially we couldn't do that. That was something that was X'd by the student, and we had to honor her in that, but we kept encouraging her to get to the point where we could create a reconciliation between her and this friend or this bully, which sometimes comes hand in hand. And then because of her anxieties and that skyrocket, we had COVID come in, and suddenly it's somewhat okay to stay home. And not that the student was going to stay home, but parents were driving her to school and she'd have a full-on panic attack, heart beating, sweating, shaking, and unable to move. And then as soon as parents tried to convince her to get out, she'd begin to scream. So then parents would have to drive home. And so this is not a normal reaction to coming to school, but obviously this is something the student is reacting to that is a lot of fear. And so what was our goal as a team at VCS? Well, it was just to get the student back in class as soon as possible and reintegrate her with her peers in a safe way. So that was our aim. And like Vanessa was talking about earlier, we kind of have to make that staircase. And so we have to design and create a staircase that works for each student individually. And by doing this, you first need to know the student and the heart behind their anxieties and their school avoidance. You can't just say, right, this is what I would do, these are the steps that would be great, because stepping into school for you might be a very different experience for someone who's deathly afraid of school. So we need to design the staircase, but it needs to be informed by the student, but directed by parents and teachers and counselors and the team around her. So the student would not have a staircase. She likes it flat. Like Jessica liked the idea of being on the top floor, but she knew that she was scared of heights, so she'd just stay on the bottom floor, and realized that was just never a goal that was ever accomplishable. And we as a team come around and say, no, it's totally accomplishable. You can do it. What is something we can do? And so we work with the student in creating the challenges. So we need to know, and sometimes the student gets so excited and they're like, okay, well, let's just take the elevator and go straight up. But each step needs to be a challenge, but not overwhelming. As soon as the student is overwhelmed, Jessica, she would flood, and she'd go back into that panic mode. She'd go into the fetal position and start shaking. And so we couldn't do that. So we had to be aware of what was a challenge and what was overwhelming. As soon as she's in the overwhelming piece, we cut all goals for the day and we take a few steps back and try and ground her, taking deep breaths, bringing her back to reality, doing some mindful exercise in terms of like, what do you see? What do you hear? Can you hear my voice? Are you, and we can work her through that. And then exposure to stresses will heighten Jessica's anxieties, and someone who worked with her closely, sometimes my anxieties would also go up, and I was like, I'd hear the scream, I'd see her shaking, and then suddenly I'm like, oh, there's a bear, there's something in this area that's scary, you're right, this is really scary. And being able for me to stay connected to my upstairs brain in those situations for Jessica is what actually brings calmness and a connection to reality. It grounds her when she can't feel grounded. So saying like, yes, Jessica, I see that this is overwhelming for you right now. I can see that this is, your experience inside is a lot, but listen to my voice, like everything's fine. You're doing really great. In fact, the fact that you're at school is an accomplishment, and talk her through those experiences. And if a student tries a step that is too large, like the times that I'll share all the steps later, but like a few times, we need to encourage the bravery when she steps out and it's too big of a step so she crumbles and can't do it. We need to encourage the fact that she attempted. That takes a lot of courage to do that. And then design a smaller step with her and give her choices in each of those steps. So we're challenging her feelings, and we're also challenging her thoughts and her experience in those moments. So this is the phase one, which I think is most important. I'm very much an attachment-focused kind of guy. And so building a village around Jessica. So Jessica didn't come to school for a while. So first of all, it's the principal who was in touch with her, and they chatted for a bit, and they had a really great relationship. And then the principal asked me to join, and so then I had created a relationship with Jessica and kind of encouraged her, and I just got to understand like the depths of where that anxiety was coming from. And then we invited the ESS coordinator, and some EAs, and the resource teacher, and all of them joined, and each of them spent time with her one-on-one online before coming to school. As well, we encouraged the community counselor, so we got the family to find a community counselor, and then we connected with that community counselor, and so we could create scripts and dialogue. So when the student enters into school and bumps into one of her peers, which is the trigger moment for her, what are some words, what can she say, how can she respond, what is her excuse for being at school? And it's not the anxiety that we want to draw attention to, it's the fact that no, you've been at online learning, and now you are coming back to school and working with Miss Harvey to catch up with your schoolwork so that you can actually rejoin the class fully. And that's a perfectly reasonable response, and is actually entirely true. We don't need to bring up all her anxieties and the fact that she has panic attacks when she sees you. That would be unhelpful. And the fourth one there is identify safe spaces. So when the student does come to school and panics, where can she go? And for this student, Jessica, we set up a place in the library, and where there's like these couches, and then there's also one of our resource teachers' offices. She could go there anytime and go work. There was the counselor's office. She could come and knock on the door. And then there were also spaces like under the stairwell where there's a little couch and it's like a hidden away space. The main thing, we just wanted to know where she was, and each of those spaces are regularly monitored by safe people in Jessica's world. So that's huge. So now when she comes to school, when she's trying these steps, if she needs to abort, she can, and she knows where to fall back to. She doesn't just start running from the school. So this is our first attempt. The student came to school, and we're like, well, the student wants to be back in class, so we're going to let her come back to class, and we'll get a teacher that she likes. We'll make it a low-pressure class, like they watched a movie for socials, I think it was, and the teacher was briefed. We let the student know that the teacher would not call on her or ask any questions or draw too much attention back. She'd just say, hey, and welcome back. Okay, so class, and just direct it back to the full class. There wasn't going to be this moldering and welcome, Jessica's back, let's all give her applause. It wasn't anything like that. It was actually just this little, I want to acknowledge you here, but welcome everyone, thanks so much for coming. And then a trusted resource teacher was in the class with them. They were going to stand in the back, not actually there for them, but there for the whole class. And that was just a fallback, a safety net, so that there was that comfort. If she needed to get up and leave, the resource teacher could walk out. And then I was also just hanging out in the hallway talking to students, just in case student decided that it was too much. And so we're going to do the first 2 blocks, but then leave at lunchtime because break was way too stressful for the student. And so we set this all up. We got the whole team on. We got the extra, and it completely failed. She didn't even manage to get into the car. She was having panic attacks that night before she was coming. She couldn't sleep. She was sweating. She was overwhelmed and just weeping. So we're like, okay, that's too much of a step. That step is way too big. So instead, we decided that we needed to go back to designing a ramp for her, a lot slower, realizing that some students are kind of basketball students and they can leap up their fears 3 steps at a time, and sometimes need to be in wheelchairs in their rehab process. So we kind of have to push them up a little bit, and eventually they can get up and get on crutches and go up steps slowly. And I like this analogy, so I'm just going to stick with it for a little bit. So attempt number 2 is number 1, slow it down. We did a lot smaller steps, and so the first one was just driving to school. Come to school, the principal or I will come out and say, hi, how you doing, how you feeling, a little bit anxious. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, this is a scary place for you, but it's safe. Like, would you like to come in and just see the library or come see my office so you know where the space is? And at first it was no. But we would just say, well, thanks so much for coming. Good job for getting in the car. That's awesome. And getting on your uniform, that's wonderful. That's a step in the right direction. And we could celebrate that. And then we scripted online different interactions when she bumps into peers, what I was saying before, and runs into them by accident. She doesn't need to go into panic mode. She can just say hi and keep walking. She doesn't actually need to engage with them. Step 3, come into the school for counseling and play games with the resource teacher. Really low risk, things that will help her calm down. When you're playing a game of cards, your mind's off the focus of the anxiety or the fact that peers are out there, and we could actually create a comfort and a safe space within the school building. And that was a huge accomplishment for her. And then each week she got more and more comfortable and she could play longer. So we kept lengthening it by half an hour, probably once every week we'd put another half hour on. And then eventually, like, there's only so long you can play Uno. So we decided, you know what, like, math is a struggle for you, but you also really enjoyed it back in the time, so why don't we begin to do some math work? So the resource teacher who worked really closely with her invited her into math work and spoke to the teachers and brought it in and kind of got her on task with what her schoolwork was, which is now, she's feeling encouragement, like she's actually beginning to do schoolwork again and beginning to catch up with her students. And she was really smart, so this wasn't an issue at all, but it's just a matter of, like, there's just a magnitude of school you've missed, so now we need to actually slowly start catching you up. Begin to talk about peers with her, which peers, and the nice thing about this resource teacher is she had a window that overlooked the playground. So a student could stand there, and the first time she was there, she was just weeping because she missed her friends so badly and wanted to be with them, but it was just such a horrific thought to go out there because it was so dangerous in her mind. But she would just watch, and she just knew all the interactions. And there were some breaks I'd just come and stand with her, and like she'd tell me about all the different connections and relationships on the field, and oh yeah, that's that person and that person, and you could see how invested and how much she cared about these individuals on the field, but just was too scared to engage. But eventually we realized, like, well, what about one student? Was one student enough? Like, could we invite one student to come join you for lunch? Like, which student would you pick if this was a possibility? And so in this hypothetical zone, she could name a couple students, and then we could begin to prompt her. And at first it was no. And eventually it was like, okay, I think that would be good. Which day? And we'd give her lots of time. We slowed it down. And eventually the student came, and it was the best lunch she had had in a long time. She was just beaming with excitement afterwards because she had had this connection with a student who saw her, who understood her, or she felt understood, and they were just talking about, like, nothing. Like, it was just talking about life, and she felt connected in that moment. And so then we took that, and that was a big celebration. and then we introduced her to more schoolwork, and then individual students would come and have lunch with her every now and then, and then the break and the students got bigger and bigger, and we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we get her to stay longer past the break and have her more interactions with peers or with other students. So initially we thought, well, let's get her supervising. I think that was Vanessa's idea. So Vanessa supervises the grade 1 breaks. So she went out with Jessica, and they observed and watched and looked after things and had a connection there. And now the student feels like they're doing something helpful. They're adding to the community of the school, and we're just slowly building on that confidence step by step. And so we slowly kept going, and then we were trying to figure out, okay, so which class might she be able to join? And so right at the beginning, we were beginning to talk about socials and how much she loves socials, and the teacher's amazing, and it was the one we were talking about earlier, and we're like, well, we began dropping that idea of going to class. Obviously, that's too big of a step right now, but we need this conversation to begin. And so eventually we got her to go to class, and it was again another socials where they were just watching a historical movie and having a conversation afterwards in small groups, and so a student could go and not feel like any attention was drawn to her, and she loved it. And also the students, when she came in, as much as the teacher tried to play it off, the students that were her friends got up and ran up and gave her a big hug and were welcoming her, and she was overwhelmed. She was just they've actually missed me. And we could point that out and say, wow, you were missed. Did you see how much your peers have missed you and how much you loved? And that played against her, this anxiety that everyone hates me, I'm stupid, I don't know, to I'm loved, I'm seen, I'm known here. And so we kept building up these pieces, but there was this one student in particular where eventually we convinced her to go to break, and we said to her, hey, let's try go to break and join your friends outside. And this took a while, and eventually she did, and she went out, and she lasted around 10 minutes, but for whatever reason, the one student who didn't quite get on the same page just ignored her. And there are other students that were engaging with her, but the one student she wanted attention from just didn't even say hi and just walked away. And this was devastating to the students. So we came back, and it was overwhelming for her, and we had to take her back to 14 and then work our way up. And now the student is back at school for most of her classes. There's one class she doesn't enjoy, and it's too anxiety provoking for her. So we've decided to skip that, but it's PE. So then now we do exercises and have come up with an adapted program for her. I realize I'm running a little short on time, but these are the main points for her that I thought were helpful: community, time, setting realistic goals, and celebrating any tiny step you celebrate with her. And it actually pays off in the end. And slow down, slow down, slow down. I'm just going to run through Kenny because I think he's one of my favorite students, but he shows symptoms of generalized anxiety and agoraphobia, and that's he likes to stay home because the rest of the world is so dangerous, and school is horrifying for him. And there was an incident at school that happened where he got hurt by another student, and as teachers, we went into panic mode. For some reason, all the teachers involved went down to their lower brain and panicked, and this anxious student who's already anxious saw all this trauma and was like, yes, I almost died. That other student almost killed me, and now I am done. I can't come to school anymore. It's too dangerous because even the adults can't keep me safe. Whereas I feel like as adults, if we had actually approached it with, oh, yeah, you got hurt. I'm so sorry. That looks so sore. Let's go get you fixed up. Aw, yeah, acknowledging that he's been hurt, but it's not something we need to blow out of proportion. And that's a huge piece with creating safety, is how do we manage our emotions around our students and our children, and make COVID, and then the students stayed home because of COVID. So the one thing that Kenny really enjoyed was imaginative play, drawing, animals and sea life, orcas, dinosaurs, Pokemon, dragons. These are the things he loved, and we spent a lot of time talking about it and playing about it in our time together online. and he'd draw pictures with me, and we'd talk about these dinosaurs and so on. And then eventually, and these were the worries, getting COVID and dying, that was his big one, he always said it, getting hurt by others, flying insects, spiders, heights, doing new things like climbing a rock he hasn't climbed before, and then coming to school is kind of folded into all of that. So eventually I convinced him to come to school, and the thing I could do was, I was like, he really was connected with me before he couldn't come to school, before COVID, and so we could bring him in and we could play all these games and these activities. And so each time we'd go on an adventure after we'd draw and do some sand tray outside, and then we'd go on an adventure and we'd go and expose ourselves to the world, and we'd find a spider and he'd panic, and I'd say, oh no, look at the spider, look at all the colors, look what he's doing, look at this beautiful web. And oh look, there's a flying insect, and even we have honeybees at school, and I let a honeybee land on me. It's like, look, this is a bee, they don't try to sting you. And just introducing him to, like, we need to respect the world around us, but it's also like a beautiful space, and the student could engage and be exposed to that. And so when you're reading the student's stress level, that is the key for actually helping them find freedom in those pieces. And now the student is coming to school, but now we are working on social anxieties and how to engage with those pieces. The last day of school, the student led us through imaginative play, and we played Jurassic Park, and he went through all of his fears just by chance, and we found a spider and he managed to flick it away with a stick, and we hid under the bush, which is scared of closed spaces because the pterodactyls were flying over, but then we needed to catch the pterodactyl, so we had to climb the highest jungle gym, and he climbed the jungle gym all by himself to the top. And I was like, I'll stay down here and make sure in case you need the net. And he's like, yeah, pass me the net. So I passed him an imaginary net and he caught the thing. And then he's like, now we need to take it down into the school basement. So we went down into the school and went down into the basement. And each of these steps actually got the student to the point where they could feel safe and back at school. So I realize I'm out of time, but I'm hoping that was helpful and you got some ideas there. But yeah, thank you for joining us.